Good evening, everyone. My name is Mike Robinson. I'm just going to get the PowerPoint started here so that we have that to look at. So I'm going to be sharing PowerPoint. We'll go ahead and get the presentation started here. And hopefully everyone can see a title slide stating Resiliency and Hazard Mitigation Plan. Is that successful so far?
Yes.
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 Great, sounds good. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Amanda Zullo with Moffitt & Nickel to give us a quick welcome and get things started for us. Amanda, we cannot hear your audio.
Okay. Looks like
I
think I did it. Perfect. Well, thank you, everyone, and we really appreciate you attending this meeting in whichever format you are choosing. I'm sure you all are aware we do have a Zoom meeting going on right now. It looks like it is connecting to Facebook Live at some point this evening. Hopefully that will happen soon, and if not, we are recording this, as well as 2 locations within New Bern itself. City Hall and Development Services are hosting in-person meeting venues for those who wanted to attend in person in a very safe and effective manner. So since we're having multiple venues hosting this meeting, we thought it'd be helpful to, just let some ground rules at first and set some rules of conduct. First and foremost, we only have an hour with each other, and it looks like we're going to be trying to run through 2 sessions of the presentation. So we ask that you be respectful and courteous of others. In addition to that, it would be really helpful if everyone could just keep themselves on mute. And if you would like to turn off your video to lessen distractions, that might be helpful. So in the event that you happen to get up and grab some water, people aren't focusing on that. And we are going to do our best to conduct, to answer as many questions as possible with the 3 different formats we have going on. We're going to have, a rotation of questions, so we ask that you be patient and have, some time with us as we get to your question. In the event that we do not have your question answered, our team will address that question. We will be providing all the questions and answers on the project website for you to look at later. And if you're attending virtually, if you've never used Zoom before, it's pretty user-friendly. There are 2 different ways you can ask questions. You can send it through the chat, which you'll see at the bottom of the screen. Looks like some questions have coming through, which is great. Or you can use the raise your hand feature, and at that point we will, announce that so-and-so will be asking a question, and the team will unmute you, so that way you can ask a question for that. And then if you're participating in an in-person venue, the team should have given some index cards. You're welcome to write down your questions on the index card and provide it to either Amanda, Colleen, or Dawn. They'll be able to read off your questions for you to either, whoever is going to be on tonight's call. Next slide. So we have 3 different presenters tonight. Mike Robinson, as you can see on the top of the screen, he is the project manager as well as the technical advisor, I guess, in terms of resiliency and hazard planning within Moffitt & Nickel. Lisa Craig is the owner of the Craig Group, and her specialty is going to be in historic preservation and community outreach. Myself will be the 3rd speaker tonight. I am with Moffitt & Nickel. I'm an urban designer, and my role in this project is community outreach specialist. At the 2 venues within New Bern tonight, we have Amanda Olenson. She is the Economic and Community Development Manager for the City of New Bern. We also have Colleen Roberts, who is the Public Information Officer for the City of New Bern, as well as Dawn York, who is our Senior Coastal Scientist at Moffitt & Nickel, and Dawn particularly loves doing outreach as well. So we appreciate everyone on tonight's call, whether you're facilitating, moderating, or speaking. So that is our lineup for this evening. Next slide. So before we get started, we have already started a community outreach effort. If you have seen the poster going around town or perhaps on social media or through an email campaign that Colleen has sent out, you should be very familiar with this information already, but we have created multiple ways for you to get involved. The first is a public participation survey, which will be up and running until September 24th. If you have not done that yet, we would greatly appreciate you taking the 10 or so minutes to fill it out. 151 people have filled it out so far, which we really appreciate your feedback on that. And all you have to do is just go to the website that's listed at the bottom of the slide. That website will direct you to all the project information. So the survey link is there. You can also subscribe to our mailing list. You can get social, so there's links to all the social media handles, whether it's Facebook or Twitter. And then there's also an email address option that if you have additional questions beyond this call, you're welcome to email the project team through that email address, and we will do our best to answer your question in a timely manner. Next slide.
Great. Thank you for that introduction, Amanda. I appreciate you running through all of that and getting us started tonight. I do want to welcome you all again. This is our first public meeting for the Resiliency and Hazard Mitigation Planning Project. Again, my name is Mike Robinson. I am serving as project manager and lead planner for this project, so very excited about that. We do want to talk a little bit for about 20 minutes to give you some information about the project, but we do want to follow that by about 10 minutes of Q&A to give you an opportunity to ask questions about the material that you seen and heard here today, and then also any input, thoughts, and ideas you may have for the project as we move forward. So again, as Amanda pointed out just a second ago, we plan to repeat the presentation at the bottom of the hour for those that may join late, or if you want to sit through the material a second time, maybe sit through the Q&A again to be part of the hour-long process. You're certainly welcome to stay on and participate in the meeting for the entire time. And again, as Amanda pointed out, we do want to direct your attention to the website. City of New Bern does have a resiliency webpage set up for this project. A lot of good information there. We're constantly adding to that as we have meetings and as new materials are developed, we're putting those out there for educational purposes for you, and then also to give you an opportunity to review and comment on those things as we go along. And I do want to thank you as well for participating in this virtual format. I know this is not what we typically do in terms of public meetings for this type of project. So we appreciate your flexibility given the conditions and participating here with us online tonight. So I do want to talk very quickly about the goal of the project. We have a goal statement that we've developed that we're still working on. We're still wordsmithing the details, but we wanted to go ahead and share this with you. If you have any input, we'd be happy to hear that. But the idea behind this project is to develop a citywide resiliency and hazard mitigation plan to increase community resilience to flooding, including sea level rise and climate change through an engaged stakeholder process. And this sounds like a simple enough statement, but I want to break it down a little bit and focus on just a few of these keywords. This is going to be a citywide plan and a municipal level plan. So it's not going to be a larger regional planning effort or statewide planning effort that you're a part of. This will be very specific to your population, your neighborhoods, your historic districts, a wide array of community assets that are of value to you that we'll look at through the course of this project. We are going to focus on resilience to flooding for this initial phase. I'll talk a little bit later about a framework that we want to create that may be applied to other natural hazards down the road. But for now, we want to focus on flooding as one of the primary hazards and threats facing the city of New Bern. And we want to look at that in terms of the potential for changes in sea level rise and also changes in the climate over time. And we want to do all this through an engaged process that involves public involvement, stakeholder engagement, working with everyone here on the line tonight, other agencies, neighboring jurisdictions as we move forward, all of those stakeholders that are appropriate, that may have input or that we want to share information with in our within and around this planning area. So what are some of our specific objectives? I mentioned just a second ago, we want to create a resiliency framework. So this is going to be more than just another plan and more than just another study. This is going to be a framework that, again, we can apply toward the flood hazard and other things down the road. But we want to look at ways that the community can avoid hazards when possible, flood hazards, withstand future flood events, support post-disaster recovery to those events, and really to help enable and educate everyone in terms of ways to build back better, not just at the city level, but also at the citizen level, with small business, with larger employers, really all sectors of the community. And we also want to look at a variety of strategic initiatives that we can integrate into community life, whether that's looking at routine day-to-day activities, maybe looking at some highly feasible solutions that are very cost-effective, maybe short-term solutions, but then also looking at some of the more ambitious solutions that may be long-term solutions that may have opportunities as we look to the future. And as you can see to the side of your screen there, the side of the slide, you can see some examples of some of the things that we want to look at in particular in terms of land use, infrastructure, green infrastructure, nature-based solutions, taking into account community values. What's important to you, not just from a traditional perspective of looking at buildings and property and critical facilities, but looking at historic properties and other things that are of value to you and that make New Bern home to you and you want to protect as we look at these flooding threats. And also, very importantly, looking at social and community health programs as well. So Lisa, tell us a little bit more about some of the things that we want to focus on as part of this project.
Sure, thanks, Mike. You know, I've been fortunate to work in a number of historic communities over my 30-some years in the historic preservation field. And to me, the most important thing is to make sure that we are working with people about the places that matter to them. So we're starting with a focus on addressing those individuals who really do count on the places, whether it's downtown, whether it's their home, whether it's public facilities, to be there and to assist them after a major disaster. So the vulnerable populations are important. The neighborhoods that were affected by Florence will be affected by sea level rise in the future, but also we have to look at our workforce. Our workforce, as I found when I was living and working in Annapolis on its resilience plan, really do depend on locations that are in the flood hazard area. So we need to think about how different populations are vulnerable. And of course, historic properties and cultural resources. There are over 900 properties in New Bern that are in the locally designated historic districts, and about another 1,100 or so that are in districts or areas that the state has determined are eligible for whether it's funding post-disaster because of historic significance, or would be reviewed as part of any action items that involve federal funding. Economic resilience is critical. It's important to the Main Street areas and the neighborhood commercial districts. Green and hybrid, Mike mentioned green. It's obvious that we need to look at nature-based approaches as well as what we sometimes call gray, but would a seawall or some other type of structural barrier really be a good option for New Bern? Perhaps there's other more creative solutions we can come up with. And self-reliance, relying more on ourselves, our communities, and each other as disasters hit and in response to those disasters, rather than more reliance on federal support. Also, land use changes. We looked at in St. Augustine, where I was recently at, public policy changes from both a regulatory point of view as well as an incentive point of view. Can we provide offsets in terms of funding support to property owners who are trying to improve resilience on their own properties? Coordination within and beyond the city limits. I think we've heard a little bit from Mike on the fact that we will be looking at the environment in which New Bern is doing its resilience planning. And as a matter of fact, I would say the state has recently come up in July 2020 with its own resilience plans. So looking at those partners for technical assistance and support and coordination, but it's all starts in New Bern first. Everything comes together in New Bern, as we know. And then lastly, the community rating system, which is under the National Flood Insurance Program. I always think about some of the FEMA folks I've worked with who remind me that where it rains, it floods. And so therefore, everyone should consider having flood insurance, whether you're in the flood hazard area or not, because that will contribute to the city's rating level under the community rating system and could improve and reduce the costs of flood insurance. So as Mike referred to, we've got a lot of guidance that's out there. We will be working on a regional resilience toolkit. North Carolina and FEMA have support functions to assist in post-event activities and also in risk communication. And the National Flood Insurance Program, as well as the National Park Service, provide flooding adaptation guidance for communities with historic resources.
Great. So let's talk about a few key definitions. We've been talking about resiliency. We've been talking about hazard mitigation, but how are we defining those things and what do those things actually mean? Resiliency in particular has a lot of different definitions depending on the agency you're talking with or the individual that you're talking with. One quick and easy definition of resiliency that we've been using is the ability to withstand, recover, and respond more quickly and effectively following an event. And when we look at hazard mitigation, this is a term that's been used by FEMA for really probably about 20 years or more, which is defined as any action taken to reduce or eliminate the loss of life and property due to natural hazards. So resiliency is a term that we've been using really over the past several years. And one thing that is unique about resiliency that looks above and beyond, I think, the traditional hazard mitigation model is that it looks not only at the sudden shocks, such as a flood or a hurricane, but also looking at chronic stressors. What is putting stress on a community on a day-to-day basis that makes it even more difficult to withstand, recover, and respond to an event? Those could be related to transportation. They could be related to the economy, to a pandemic, for example. And so resiliency is really looking at this broader perspective above and beyond what New Bern has participated in the past with a more traditional hazard mitigation approach. But the title of the plan is going to include both of these processes as we move forward, both of these concepts. So another set of terms that I wanted to introduce you to tonight as we talk about vulnerability assessment. And the reason I wanted to go through this is because at our next public meeting, we plan to talk a lot more about the flood risk assessment, the flood vulnerability assessment that we're going to be working on and looking at how flooding impacts the community. And so I wanted to go ahead and talk about a few definitions to kind of get us in the right mindset. And one of those is exposure. And that's the presence of people and assets that could be affected by a flood event. And when we look at exposure, this is really sort of the most basic thing we can look at. So we can identify that, for example, 100 homes are located in the special flood hazard area. But that doesn't take into account whether those homes are elevated, if they're mitigated in some other way, if those property owners carry flood insurance. So we can look at the exposure, but the next step in that process is to look at vulnerability. So that's where we look at how susceptible those assets actually are to a flood event. What is the first finished floor elevation of the home? Has the business been flood-proofed in some way? And then as we understand not just what is exposed to the flood hazard, but what is actually vulnerable, then we can begin to look at what is the actual risk. What is the likelihood of occurrence for flooding at that particular site, whether it's at the parcel level, the neighborhood level, the district level, and what are the potential consequences? And a lot of times we do look at that in terms of a financial impact, and we look at direct physical damages, but we also want to look at social impacts and that socioeconomic piece to look not just at the impact of flooding on buildings and structures and property, but on people and how that affects and how we recover from that. So as I very tactfully move my video screen so I can see if I had anything else there in my notes. I did want to say you will have an opportunity as well to provide information that will help finalize this assessment. So I mentioned at our next public meeting, we'll probably be sharing some preliminary findings with you to look at some maps and tables and graphics that we will be preparing. But we do want to get your input on this. We want to find out from you where you've observed flooding, what your experiences have been. So again, we don't want this to just be a study. We want the input to make this something real to you as we move forward. So Amanda, at this point, why don't you tell us a little bit more about how people can be informed and involved as the process moves forward?
Sure, thanks, Mike. Yeah, so everyone is aware that COVID completely transformed the way we conduct community outreach. So this year has been a little bit of a challenge, but also a great opportunity for us to hybridize our approach. Tonight is a great example of conducting a meeting through Zoom, while at the same time hosting the meeting in person through socially safe means. So we've created an outreach strategy that focuses primarily on a hybrid approach, using a lot of virtual and online opportunities, as well as in-person and printed collateral. Tonight is one of 3 public meetings that will be hosted through Zoom. We also have the project information website that we alluded to earlier. That will actually be hosting all of the project resources, as well as any presentation that is going to come through this project process. So all the resources will be readily available through the website. We're also using social media, as Colleen was working very hard to make sure it's connecting through Facebook Live for this particular meeting, using social media channels to get the word out about the survey, as well as the meetings, as well as even hosting meetings live through those formats. We're using that to our advantage as well. We are going to have 3 surveys. So the survey that we're hosting right now that runs through the 24th, this is in tandem with this public meeting. As we move through the planning process and as the concepts and strategies evolve, we would love to have your feedback factored into each one of those surveys. So hopefully you'll be staying tuned and subscribing on that website, so you'll be able to, continue to provide us feedback as well. In addition to that, Colleen, being the New Bern Public Information Officer, is doing a phenomenal job getting out press releases, email campaigns, and any other outreach strategies that we can use to get the word out in terms of a virtual and online format. So now that we've addressed the virtual and online opportunities, Lisa, would you mind sharing with us how else New Bern citizens can get engaged?
Sure, thanks, Amanda. Sometimes I'm kind of old school on this stuff, so we're going to be doing what we've been doing so far, these public town hall style meetings, but we're going to be dealing at the individual level with community leaders. We're going to have stakeholder discussions, and I'd like to point out the fact that it's really important in this first public meeting that we're having with you all to provide us as a follow-on in the Q&A or even in the chat. If you represent a certain stakeholder group you think is playing a leading role in building resilience for New Bern's future. So please self-identify yourself if you think that's the case. We have a great list, but we're looking for more individuals who are interested in giving their viewpoints, as well as completing the survey, getting more out to other members of the community. So we will be having different approaches with different groups. I know in doing public meetings in the past, I've spoken with Rotary organizations, I've gone to business groups, met with the chambers committees. There are a lot of different things we can do, so please provide your ideas on that. And then of course, printed materials. We'll work with city to get flyers posted at all the public locations. We have meeting announcements. Maybe that's something that can be put into your church bulletin, for example. So getting those hard copy pieces out there in terms of not only announcements, but surveys, something again, we'll be seeing if we can provide at the public buildings, hard copies of the surveys for those that aren't able to complete an online survey. And then just the project information for educational purposes, whether we're providing this at City Hall or at the public library. It's important for us to do that, as well as an information kiosk. and even other methods, door hangers or mailed information. If any of these appeal to you more than any other, please do through the chat or just an email or response on the Resiliency webpage, let us know what works best for you. In-person outreach is great. That's what we're looking to do if we possibly can do it in any way. And we do really rely on you and your contacts to spread the word about these events. So I will now turn this back to, oh, I get the next slide too, it looks like. So I will follow this. As you heard from Amanda, we have gotten some very good response. I was very pleased to see we've had over 150 respondents, but we'd like to see a bit more. So even in this survey, we have seen that 78% of those who've responded live in New Bern. So we are getting a very strong local response, but still are also getting a response from those in the region. We might have 67% who do not live in a floodplain, but 87% of the respondents are concerned about this issue. 80% believe New Bern should regulate new construction and redevelopment to incorporate flood protection measures. And even myself as a historic preservationist have learned to work with historic property owners to do just that as they undertake rehabilitation work on their buildings. Some of the comments that came back, we just heard, my greatest concerns about how future flooding and storms will impact New Bern and Craven County are making sure our local city and government leaders are working, collaborating with state and regional leaders to better prepare and make this a more resilient community against flooding issues. So again, coordination, collaboration, that is something that we'll be working through the city and county to do in this project. That the resiliency plan doesn't adversely impact underserved communities. Agreed. I think we all want to see, if anything, underserved communities prioritized in funding of projects. So we'll continue to work to make sure that this truly is representative of the entire city, as Mike had referred to earlier. My home and others in my neighborhood will flood again. I can't mentally or physically handle another flood. Resilience has a lot of different definitions, and when we're dealing with social resilience in particular, we reach out and work with public health officials to understand how to ensure there's greater cultural and social resilience. So that's a terrific point to be made. And then, of course, speaks to me the issue of the need to ensure that we have adequate planning to protect the downtown historic buildings and the general infrastructure. These are economic assets. They are socially and culturally important components of the city's identity, and we will work with the city to ensure that they are protected. So I think we're on to our next slide now. And Mike, is this yours to take on? Oh, nope, we still got Amanda. Thanks.
Thank you, Lisa. This schedule graphic is actually also available on the project website. So if it's a little hard to read, or if you'd like to be able to reference it in the future, you're welcome to go to the website, and it has a pop-up window so you can look at it in further detail. But the overall gist of this graphic basically is showing the duration of our project schedule. So if you just follow down through phase 1, you can see that there is a public input duration of time that began in August, and it will go through end of January for 2021 and then pick back up in April. Those 3 red circles right there represent the 3 public meetings. You'll notice that we're obviously in the September 2020. The next time we'll all get together as a public meeting will be in January of next year. That will be where we'll show some planning progress updates. And then the final public meeting will occur in June of next year, where the planning team will show the results of the project and what has happened through then. In addition to the 3 public meetings, we are going to have stakeholder engagement opportunities that Lisa had alluded to. There's obviously certain groups within New Bern that we'd like to really hone in on their interests and concerns, and so those will be wonderful opportunities to get into a further fine grain of detail regarding their concerns for resiliency and hazard mitigation within New Bern. And then, again, we'll still have those 3 surveys. So If you can, stay with us and subscribe, participate in the survey that is occurring right now. The other 2 public meetings will host surveys, and they will run for an additional 1 month at each time period. So plenty of opportunity to voice your opinion, voice your feedback. And we will want to preface it with the fact that, although this schedule graphic may appear to be set in stone, we will be adjusting it on an as-needed basis. But for now, this is the guidebook. We are planning on, having meetings in each of those months. And if you do subscribe with us, we'll be happy to keep you updated as the project evolves from there. So Mike, now that we've had a chance to look at the project schedule, do you want to maybe share with us results on what this engagement will actually result in?
Sure. Of course, the ultimate goal is to develop the City of New Bern's first resiliency and hazard mitigation plan. Another piece to this will be an interactive vulnerability assessment tool that will be available to city departments and others to look at flood risk and to look at that in an interactive environment where they can assess flood risk, looking at it through a variety of different lenses. Ongoing community involvement, hopefully even beyond the life of this project. Hopefully we will establish a rhythm and sort of a resiliency mindset and ethic, if you will, as we go forward, that will continue through ongoing community involvement. And really the ultimate goal, again, as we've been talking about tonight, is a more resilient New Bern. And with that, we've already had a lot of great discussion tonight. I'm excited about all the information that we've already been able to share. I do want to go ahead and open things up now for questions. I won't take the time to read back through all the material that Amanda went over earlier, but I do want to, I guess, just kind of emphasize that we want to make sure there's time tonight for questions that you have about the material presented today. Any thoughts and input you have for moving forward, and any specific expectations you might have for this project, things that you hope to see through this effort. So I think I'm going to turn it over to Amanda to help facilitate maybe the first few questions maybe that we've received.
Sure. So this question will be for either Mike or Lisa. The first question that was asked is, what examples of other cities or regions that have successfully mitigated are we turning to for guidance?
Sure, so I'll let Lisa speak to that first, and then I'll chime in after that with a second point as well.
Sure, thanks, Mike. As I mentioned in my brief review, there are a number of historic cities that have dealt with this issue. A lot of you may be familiar with Charleston, development of its design guidelines, for example, to address what is becoming an every year major flooding event for them, as well as tidal flooding, which is also something that was experienced in Annapolis. St. Augustine recently have completed some work there, and one of the important tools that came out of that was a public policy toolkit. That's something that I think we can build upon and develop for New Bern, looking at the issues relative to how we can both regulate but incentivize the adaptation of buildings. Nantucket is also very much involved right now, developing design guidelines for how to elevate its historic buildings, and in some instances, how to just better manage flooding with those properties. And what I want to point out is it's not always just about the historic buildings. There's many buildings and neighborhoods that were constructed in the 1920s and 30s, and the same types of adaptation strategies that might work for older buildings or even buildings in a historic district can be made to adapt to any type of older property. So I think we're looking at those communities that have been successful in putting hazard mitigations and resiliency plans in place that incorporate historic properties, and also that respect the fact that there needs to be a full set of tools available for planning for future resilience.
Sure. And I'll just mention as well, we've worked on a recent project with the city of Elizabeth City on flood mitigation and a more resilient waterfront master plan. We've also, I have worked with a number of communities in Eastern North Carolina following Hurricane Matthew, especially with the resilient redevelopment planning that was done following that event. So certainly all of that neighboring knowledge is something that we can bring to the project and infuse that into the sections of the plan that we develop. And as we move forward, if it makes sense to work with any particular partners, we are certainly open to bringing them in as stakeholders for those future stakeholder engagement meetings.
Great. So Mike and Lisa, the next comment that came through is not a question, but it is a comment, and it is from Larry. He mentioned that in New Bern, there is a group that was formed after Florence called CARE, which represents Citizens Advocating Resiliency and Community Education. He mentioned that Amanda O has his contact information, but he thinks it would be phenomenal for the team to get in touch with the CARE group as they do represent leaders of various organizations. So Larry, thank you for that, and we will certainly be reaching out to you and your group whenever we are conducting those stakeholder interviews. Looks like there are no questions coming through from development services. So everyone, please don't be shy. Feel free to send in questions. You're welcome to use the chat feature as listed on the screen. You can also use the raise your hand feature within Zoom if you would like to speak directly to either Mike or Lisa. It looks like William had requested, just to get some more information. He'd be very interested to hear about the background and credentials of the speaking team, so Mike, Lisa, and myself. Mike, Lisa, I know you both just elaborated on some projects you've worked on in terms of resiliency, but perhaps you can share a little bit about your background and credentials and what you hope to bring to those planning projects.
Sure. I'd be happy to. I'll break the ice and start with that. I've been doing hazard mitigation planning for 20 years. I started out in state government. I've worked for 2 different state governments, including the state of North Carolina. And I'm currently working at my 3rd private sector firm doing mitigation planning on the private sector side of things. But hazard mitigation has been my full-time job for 20 years in some shape, form, or fashion, whether it's on the planning side, grants management, different types of planning that ties in with hazard mitigation. So that's just kind of a quick snapshot of my my background. I have been in North Carolina for 20 years, so I know my way around a little bit. Mentioned Hurricane Matthew, worked with all 50 counties that were impacted, declared during Hurricane Matthew. So there's all of that as well. But Lisa, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself as well?
Well, I think I can echo Mike in the sense that I've been in the field 30 years. Sorry, I got 10 more years on you than that. But I can echo on the fact that I've worked in both public and private sector. I've worked for 3 private sector firms myself. I started my career in historic preservation, running a statewide nonprofit preservation group in Oregon, and quickly was able to find my way to the National Trust for Historic Preservation in Washington, D.C. So I spent about the last 27 years living in the DC area. I served as the State Historic Preservation Officer for the District of Columbia, and also it's the duplicate hat of the local preservation chief for the district, as well as most recently with the city of Annapolis. But I've worked in private property redevelopment for the military, doing military housing around the country. Had great opportunity to work on projects like Pearl Harbor and the U.S. Air Force Academy. So I've seen the issue of disaster and how it can impact historic resources in entire communities. And for the past 10 years, starting in Annapolis, I've really focused my efforts in working on resilience and addressing issues of disaster management and preparation in historic communities. Hence, I've had the great opportunity to work in national landmark cities like Annapolis, St. Augustine, and Nantucket, and am really looking forward to this work in New Bern. been to New Bern numerous times, and look forward to, again, coming and being part of the community.
Great, thank you, Lisa. And a little bit of background on myself. I had mentioned earlier that I'm an urban designer. In case you're wondering what that is, my particular background is actually in real estate development, architecture, and planning. In the 10 years that I've had in my career, I've had wonderful opportunities working on waterfronts, both nationally as well as in the state of North Carolina and globally, if that. Sea level rise, resiliency has always been near and dear to my heart. My thesis project in grad school was about how rising tides could affect the city of Philadelphia's waterfront, and looking to historical precedents and their peers, and how we can hopefully, pivot toward a suitable future for our cities that are continuously getting bombarded by these storms. So waterfront destination planning is very much embedded in my DNA. I know Mike and I have worked together on the City of Elizabeth City project, which was wonderful. We've actually had a chance to present that project as a case study at various American Planning Association conferences, both in North Carolina as well as in Virginia. We were supposed to actually present the case study at nationals, but unfortunately due to COVID, that project was kind of put on halt in terms of a presentation format. So definitely, it's a good team. I think our passions are coming through. And with that, I guess we can get back to some of the questions that have come through as we've been sharing our personal backstories. So this could be for either Mike, Lisa, or Amanda or Colleen. The next question is from Jean. She would like to know how this planning will be integrated into the New Bern Urban Design Plan and the redevelopment plan that have already been developed.
Great, Amanda, do you want to address that, or would you like for me to? I'll go ahead and jump in. I think one of the things that we've done as part of this project is we've done an extensive literature review step where we've accessed and reviewed all of the existing plans and documents for the city of New Bern, and other relevant documents, whether they're regional or state level. And as part of doing that, we've been breaking them down and identifying areas where they address flood risk, flood mitigation, where they provide opportunities to support that, where they may, for example, provide some disincentives in some shape, form, or fashion. And so we're looking for opportunities there as we review those documents to integrate what we do as part of this process. I think what we highlight as part of this process would be in the form of recommendations that can then go forward to the appropriate department, to the appropriate heads that are responsible for those plans, whether that's local or regional. For example, the regional hazard mitigation plan. And those things can move forward as recommendations, and those planning teams, those committees can look at integrating this information, the risk information, the potential mitigation solutions into those plan documents as appropriate.
Okay, the next question is coming from Facebook, and this could be either to Mike, Lisa, or again to Amanda and Colleen. Is Stanley White included in this process on Chapman Street?
I'm sorry, Amanda, I didn't catch. Could you repeat the question, please? I think there was just a little glitch in the audio.
Sure, yeah. So the question is coming from Facebook Live. Colleen is the one who sent it to us. So is Stanley White included in this process on Chapman Street?
I think Amanda may be having a little bit of trouble unmuting herself in the development services room. Stanley White is located in an area that frequently floods, and this is one of the goals of this resiliency initiative, is to look at those areas that repeatedly suffer during disaster events. So wholeheartedly, the answer to will we be looking at Stanley White and the area in which it is located, absolutely.
Sure, sure. And I'll just build on that as well to say that, when we are looking at the flood vulnerability assessment, we are looking at the entire community and the surrounding area. And from that, we will begin to look at hotspots, historical hazard occurrences where we think. So through that process as well, we're not ruling any other, I know you are referencing one specific property and street. We're not ruling anything out up front. We're looking at where the flood risk is across the community, and we'll begin to narrow that down from there in terms of where the high, moderate, and lower risks are within the community. So great question. Thank you for asking that.
All right, and then the last question I see right now, again, we still have about 10 minutes, so feel free to send in more questions if you have them. The question from Maria is, can the group describe in a bit more detail what stakeholder involvement looks like when developing a resiliency plan?
Sure, absolutely. So we're kind of talking about two different things when we talk, some of the terms that we've used tonight with public involvement and then stakeholder engagement. And a lot of times when we engage the stakeholders, those are groups that have, may, for example, have data sets that we need to get from them to explore and integrate into our assessment that we're doing. They may be responsible for other studies that are coming out. They may have valuable historical information that we can integrate into what we're doing otherwise. And so the stakeholders a lot of times tend to be departments and agencies and members of the academic community. They may be at a level that they can help support some of the plan writing, provide technical review of some of the draft products that we develop. So that's a little bit different than, and I know stakeholders are also members of the public, especially if those stakeholders live within the community. They're also homeowners. They're also, so there's kind of that overlap as well, but they may also participate just as a homeowner, a property owner, or shop owner if they have more than one profession. So that's kind of one quick answer to the question. Lisa, do you want to add anything else to that as well?
I would just add that through these processes, many times we come up with goals and objectives. We have certainly, in the community values exercise, come up with priorities for preservation and adaptation. So the stakeholders really are a double check for us on that. Many times we'll have some ideas of goals, or they will help us develop the specific goals or objectives of the planning efforts. So they play a very important role because usually they've been involved all the way through the process. And we really feel as if they represent the voices of the community. So that's why it's so important to involve organizations like CARE, for example. And that's why it was important for us to hear from CARE members this evening that they are there, and there's an opportunity for us to talk to many of them because of all of the groups that they represent. So Mike, you're right. We will use our partners because, again, the federal and state agencies oftentimes provide the funding for some of these initiatives to go to the next level, to be implemented. So they are very important. But even more important are the members of the community who are going to be there and be part of the preparation and recovery process in the case of a disaster.
And I'll mention one other thing as well to build on that. And Lisa, I thought of this as you were talking, that once we identify these potential mitigation solutions, we are going to want to obviously look at implementing those solutions that the community decides to move forward with. And that does require funding. And a lot of times as you involve the agencies that provide that funding, that are responsible for running those grant programs, if they've been more involved in the process and know more about the process that you follow, they know more about what you're trying to do, why you're trying to do it, they understand firsthand the benefits, the things that they've seen and heard, sometimes that can help as the process moves forward and can help make the process easier as those grant applications are developed and that information is put forward for the successful implementation of the projects.
And looks like Amanda over at City Hall had sent a message saying that New Bern is in process of applying for grants to build on that process. So great news to hear that they're already, one step ahead of the game on that. So Mike and Lisa, it looks like we have about 6 minutes left on our time. It looks like we do not have any more questions coming through. Is there anything else the two of you could think to share with the folks on the call while we have some extra time with each other?
I think before we think of any, or as we're thinking of anything else we might want to share, I do want to thank everyone again for participating tonight, for being flexible. I know that we have gotten into some good discussions, some good questions. We've not exactly followed the schedule that we put forward at the top of the hour, but believe it or not, that's always part of the plan. If we have good questions, good discussion, we want to keep that going. We don't want to rush through things just to say that we did go through the presentation twice. So thank you all for participating. Very thoughtful questions. Lisa, is there anything else that you want to add, perhaps?
I just, we've had a lot of faces participating. I know at the sign-in, I saw a lot of members of the community, different ages. Just, it's great to see it. I think that's a great value to all of us. And I encourage every one of you to share this information, to share the link to others in your community and your neighborhood, and get them involved. Because as Amanda alluded to, we have a great response on the survey, but we'd love to see more responses. And I personally like to see the anecdotes. I want to hear your stories. I want to hear what your concerns are. So please share with us over the next few months your own personal stories about why this matters to you.
Great, perfect. And again, I'll just reiterate, and Amanda, you might have been about to do this as well, but the slides from tonight will be available on the website, the Resiliency landing page that we've talked about. So please be looking for those if you want to go back over any of the definitions or goals, objectives that we've talked about tonight. And Amanda, what closing comments do you have for us?
The only thing I can think of is if you have a question that comes up between now and the next meeting, which won't be until January, on the project website, we do have that email address. You're welcome to send in questions later this evening. You can also send them as they come about, while you're going through the project website. Maybe something strikes you and you want an answer resolved. We'll be happy to have someone from the team who's best suited to answer that question do so for you. And yeah, we just really appreciate you taking the time to be with us this evening. The slides will become available on the New Bern Resiliency page, probably sometime tomorrow, if not later this evening, but we greatly appreciate everyone's participation this evening, so thank you.
On behalf of the City of New Bern, thank you everyone for participating, for asking questions. For those who showed up to our in-person venues, thank you for coming. Please stay tuned to the project initiative. We're going to end the Zoom call as well as the Facebook Live now. Hope everybody has a great night.